Hey, hi, and howdy world. It's me, Blixio. Uh, Getting started off here. Uh, Now that I'm taking a break from Python, I'm looking to get. I think PowerShell is going to be a good sort of scripting a language shell that whatever you want to call it that we can get into. I ended up getting this specific because there's a whole um, playlist here from John Savill. I ended up getting this from this Class Central website, just different PowerShell courses, and this was recommended on here. Um, and I've seen some of John Saville's stuff before when I was doing studying for Microsoft Azure. It seems like a lot of the stuff that he does is really like geared towards Microsoft. Um, but anyways, I probably won't be able to watch this entire video tonight. So at some point you may see a time shift, but yeah, just gonna go ahead and get started in here. I'm sure it's gonna be very fundamental starting out, and but it's always good stuff. So without any further ado,
So welcome to my PowerShell Masterclass. My name is John Savill, and just a quick bit about me. My Twitter handle is NTFAQGuy. I'll try and tweet if I'm posting a new video, a new blog article, some new training course. And as I post more modules for this PowerShell Masterclass, I'll tweet there. If I update them, I'll do a little tweet. I've been an MCSE for what feels like forever. I originally started the NTFAQ, wow, over pretty about 25 years ago now. My latest book was Mastering Server 2016 Hyper-V, and I'm just about to start work on an updated Azure infrastructure book. I speak at a lot of the major industry conferences like TechEd and Windows Connections and Ignite. I have a large number of Pluralsight courses available focused around Windows Server and Azure. I blog at saviltech.com, and there's a link to my YouTube channel. Now, my goal for this PowerShell Masterclass is I actually used to do this as an annual event online. It was a paid event and I updated it and delivered it every year. It wasn't available on demand. It was just a live event so I could do kind of Q&A. Was the industry has changed, that doesn't make sense so much anymore. And I've had all this great material that I didn't want to just waste. So I've updated it, I've refreshed, and I'm just going to deliver this as a free YouTube set of videos. In the actual channel, it will have them in the right order. I may mess around and add new ones as time goes on, as technology evolves, and based on your feedback. And if you check out the PowerShell Masterclass playlist, that's going to have them all in the right order. My plan for this is I will update it as I need to, based on your feedback, based on the comments, people emailing me, etc. If something new comes out, I'll create a new video or update an existing one. But these are some of the key module themes I'm thinking about right now. This is the fundamentals module. Then we'll talk about remote management, connecting commands together, mastering objects, creating scripts, advanced scripting, how I can parse data and work with objects, desired state configuration, PowerShell workflows, Azure automation, Azure functions, and then just other stuff. So that's my initial plan, but obviously if you're looking at this way out in the future, this might be out of date. And really that source of truth will be the PowerShell Masterclass playlist on the NTFAQ Guy YouTube channel. So let's get to it. Our first module is PowerShell Fundamentals. And I really want to break this down into thinking about, well, what did we have before PowerShell? So what drove us to actually need this? Thinking about the various PowerShell interfaces we may use, and just some basic structure around PowerShell commandlets and the modules. So in those dark, gloomy days when I didn't have PowerShell, we used the command prompt, and we're kind of used to that idea. We can fire up cmd.exe and we can run a lot of different commands from now. Now, when I think about the command prompt, there are built-in commands. I can do things like dir. I can also call separate executables, for example, such as ipconfig. So here I am in the good old command prompt. I can run dir. I can get a list of the objects within this particular folder. That's a built-in command. I can call separate executables. For example, I can run ipconfig. Now, what's different about those two things? If I go and actually look in Windows and I search for dir.exe, I'm not going to find it. There is no dir.exe. dir is just a built-in command of cmd. I'm not going to find it as a separate executable. In contrast, if I was to actually go ahead and search for ipconfig, well, that it's going to find. That's a separate executable, and I'm calling that from within cmd.exe. So I have these different types of command, those that are built in, those that are external. And that does become important. Now, in the CMD world, I could create batch files. I could have a number of different commands. They run in sequence. They perform some activity. I could also do some pipelining, but it was very limited because the output from the commands that's sent to the next command is just a text string. And pipeline can be phenomenally powerful if it's done the right way. So what does this mean? Let's go back to our CMD. And again, I could do dir. And it just lists me all the different folders. Now, it sends them in order, so I'm actually okay there. There's also a sort command. So if I did dir pipeline, i.e. send the output from this command to this next command, it's sorting it. But what's it sorting it by? Well, it has zero clue what a file is or what a folder is. All it gets is text strings. So the all blank ones get put at the front, then the ones with a lot of blank and then 19, then 75. Oh look, then there's blank and a character. It's just looking at strings. So this is actually fairly useless to me. Then there might be things I could do to try and make this do what I want. If I look at the help for dir, well, there's a bare format. So I could do dir bare. Okay. So then if I want to get more folders, I can maybe do dir/b, look at all the subfolders and then send that to a sort. And it kind of gets me what I want. So very limited. And it's very limited because the output of any command I get is just a text string. I don't get the real object. I'm not keeping it as a folder, as a file, as an ipconfig, as really anything as a user in Active Directory. It's just a text string. And that's really the fundamental challenge we have. Now, there are other solutions in that scripting world. There's WMI, bscript, JScript. Lots of them that provide a richer language,
I haven't heard of any of
much
them.
richer than what I can do in a batch file. They have their own format. They have their own different levels of capability. They have their own syntaxes. So I have to switch between,
Yes,
hey, when
Visual
I'm writing a
Basic
script,
maybe?
and then when I'm doing something interactive at the command line. So I'm having to learn different systems, different environments, and they're really not very extensible. It was kind of fixed to, well, this is what it can do. Good luck. And so enter PowerShell. This was, I remember being an MVP long, long ago and sitting in Redmond, and they gave a presentation on this thing called Monad. And that was the initial name for PowerShell.
Monad.
And it provides an environment for both executing live
Like even
commands
backwards, it doesn't make
and
sense.
creating really
Like
powerful scripts.
it's a
Now, it's built
odd
on
name.
the .NET framework. That's really the foundation of pretty much everything in Windows. Everything is exposed in some way through .NET. So because it runs on top of .NET, it's pretty much limitless what it can do. Plus, with PowerShell, I can use other protocols, hook into other things. Now, I say .NET Framework, that's traditionally what PowerShell was built on. As we're going to talk about later on, we now have this thing called PowerShell Core. That originally shipped as part of Server Core, but has really now gone way, way beyond that. That is the future of PowerShell. It's open source. I can run it on things like Linux. And that is actually built on .NET
I didn't
Core.
even know that until
.NET Core is designed to run
probably
across
6 months
multiple
ago.
different types of system and platform. But for both of those, it's focused around objects. It doesn't just output a text string. It may end up being a text string if that's kind of the last thing in the pipeline. Hey, I've done all of these different sequences, and at the end is just a terminal. So sure, I'll show you a text string representing whatever objects I had. But that's the key thing. It keeps them as objects all the way through. That enables me to do a phenomenal amount of things. So now I'm actually in PowerShell. I'm in PowerShell 6, actually 6.1. And I can run dir again.
Hopefully that doesn't become an issue, because from what I
Let's just
understand,
move
you
up,
either want
make
to
it a
use
bit more interesting.
5.1
Go to the same
7.
place. If I run dir, there's some content in there. I can still do pipelining. I can do sort object. Well, this time it's not messed it up. I've still got the same format at the start telling me, well, I have these directory, I have some blank lines, and then I have my files and folders. I can even say, well, let's sort it descending. It's not messed up that header again. But now it's just moved the content, the actual objects. And that's because the output from dir was a series of objects. And it has sent those objects down the pipeline to the next command. So what sort object gets is not a list of text strings, it's getting a number of objects. I can be even flasher. I could say, well, yeah, sort object, property, last write time.
Also, if you're wondering, like if I have this, custom background for PowerShell, I must have been putting in, some time with this before, and don't be mistaken. That this is that background is about the extent that I've been messing with PowerShell here lately. So we're going to be learning all together at the same time.
Because that's an attribute, and so I can sort based on that. In case you don't believe me, I can kind of prove that if I do a dir again. And don't worry about exactly what I'm running right now. All I'm going to do is for everything that I'm getting past, I want to just output for each object the type. So I'm just going to look at the full name of the type, and just you can see how it relates. We'll also send out the name. The little $_ represents the past object. So the past object's type, and then the past object's name. And so we can see, yep, I'm being sent directories and then a file. That's the contents that I'm actually getting via the pipeline. So dir is sending me objects. And that's kind of the key point. That's what's going to open up so much power with PowerShell. Additionally, PowerShell uses a very consistent naming of the commands. These are what I'm actually going to leverage. It uses a verb-noun pair. And the idea is it's the least cognitive distance. What that really means is, hey, the command should be obvious based on what I'm trying to do. If I'm trying to get a list of processes, well, the verb is get, the noun is process. So if I jumped over, well, is it get process? Hey, look, it is. So that's the idea. Hey, I want to get a list of the services. If I wanted to create a new type of object, hey, look, there's a new object command. And then what's the type? And I can go through all the different types of objects I can do. But the idea is, hey, I think about what I'm trying to do. The command is probably pretty obvious. I can just think about what's logical.
Keyword, probably.
I'm obviously going to go through a lot more detail to find commands, find the modules, because there are a lot of them. Even in PowerShell Core, which as of right now, Sunday morning, January 2019, is a subset of what's available in the full PowerShell. But most of what we want is in there, and it's growing rapidly, really catching up with regular Windows PowerShell. With so much power, so many different capabilities, a simpler language and standards-based is important. There are literally thousands of commandlets. So as mentioned, we have this least cognitive distance. We're going to use this verb noun. And over the course of history of PowerShell, they've really worked to try and simplify the commandlets that are considered core, the things I'm going to use over and over again. For example, there were new core commandlets related to new functionalities, and also changes to existing commandlets to have a simpler syntax, get child item. And that get child item we've actually used already. You may say, well, no, we haven't. There's no such thing as dir in PowerShell. Dir was really just an alias to make it easier for me as a Windows person to get child items. So where I was in a certain object, a folder, a location, when I ran dir, well, it actually went and called get child item. I can manage non-Windows, such as Linux, as WSMan and SIM are the default protocols used for management, but with PowerShell Core, it can actually utilize SSH in addition to WSMan. And remote management is enabled by default. How do I get PowerShell? Well, you've got it already, almost definitely if you're running on Windows. But with PowerShell Core, it can actually utilize SSH in addition to WSMan. And remote management is enabled by default. How do I get PowerShell? Well, you've got it already, almost definitely if you're running on Windows. So PowerShell v2 was available all the way back to 2008 SP1. It was pre-installed on 2008 R2 and Windows 7. There were certain requirements, but we're really not going to worry about that.
Well, SP2.
PowerShell v3 would be considered the bare minimum version. That was standard in 2012 and Windows 8. I could also get it as part of WMF, the Windows Management Framework 3. It was made available for 2008 SP2 and above. I could run it side by side with V2, and if you've got anything less than this, go get it now. You need at least PowerShell v3. It introduced a lot of cool capabilities around better sessions, robust sessions, scheduled jobs, delegated admin, simplified language syntax, easier to find commandlets. Really, I need to be at least there. Then PowerShell 4 came along, and this was standard in 2012 R2 and 8.1. again available in WMF4, which took it all the way back to 2008 R2 and above. And even then, I can still have the version 2 available. Then we get to the V5, and V5 kind of finished out, I would say, the initial vision for PowerShell. So V4 gave us things like desired state configuration that enabled us to define configuration in a declarative manner. This is what I want, go and make it so. With V5, we're really getting into that new world of online repositories, DevOps. Now, there were some new commandlets, get item property value to easily look at property values. There were some updates to the integrated scripting environment, the built-in editor debugger for PowerShell. DSE had some performance and optimizations. There were improvements around some networking commandlets. But now we had this one-get capability. I could hook into things like Chocolatey. I could go and get software packages. And this is all part of WMF5. And this completed that initial vision. There was a V5.1. This was part of 2016 and Windows 10. Also part of WMF 5.1. That meant I could run it on Windows 7 and above. Required .NET Framework 4.5. There were some minor changes, and there's the download link. But think of all of these as Windows PowerShell. It's what comes built into the operating system. So here on my Windows 10 box, if I go and click Start, and I type PowerShell, you see I've got a PowerShell window. Pretend this PowerShell 6.1 doesn't exist, but I'd have PowerShell, and I've got the PowerShell integrated scripting environment. If I launch that, if I run a PS version table, I can see I'm running 5.1, and I'm running the desktop edition. So I'm not running core, but this is the latest Windows PowerShell, what's built into the operating system. And this is likely to be the last one. The future is moving to PowerShell Core. Now, this is not shipped as part of Windows, other than it was originally part of Nano Server. Nano Server was the super thin version of Windows Server. It debuted in Windows Server 2016. Really gold towards a few key infrastructure roles, like, hey, it's my Hyper-V server. It was also the base OS for containers, and what they found pretty quickly was,
so you know, use PowerShell and PWS
Nano servers best fit for that base OS for containers. Not so much for the infrastructure services, because they're trying to do two different things. Let's just make it super thin as we can for containers, and we'll kind of go back to server core for our infrastructure roles. But they had to create this special version of PowerShell to run on Nano Server, because Nano Server couldn't run .NET Framework. Instead, it had this .NET Core, a subset, which didn't have reliances on bits of Windows that didn't exist. And so this PowerShell Core runs on .NET Core, and .NET Core is available cross-platform. So, hey, I can take this and I can run it on Linux, I can run it on Mac, and obviously I can run it on Windows. This is the future investment. This is where everything is now going to go with PowerShell. Windows PowerShell will still get fixes, but there's not going to be, hey, great new functionalities added to it. The future enhancements, all the investment is going to be in PowerShell Core. So I would kind of get on this train now. Most existing PowerShell does work on PowerShell Core. Now, as we're going to cover later in this course, functionality is delivered in these things called modules. And it's really up to the people that write the modules to make sure it works on .NET Core instead of the .NET Framework. And some modules do rely on .NET Framework. They won't run on .NET Core. So not everything that runs in PowerShell, Windows PowerShell, is going to run in PowerShell Core, but it's constantly improving. We're going to talk about this in a lot more detail. With the latest PowerShell Core 6.1, they actually now have a compatibility module that kind of helps even more regular modules run on PowerShell Core. But in my work so far, pretty much everything I need runs on PowerShell Core. The only big thing missing was Azure Active Directory, but even that I found a solution to because the Azure Cloud Shell supports Azure AD, and I found they have a preview module for Azure AD that I grabbed and I ran locally. So pretty much everything I need I can do in PowerShell Core, and that's what I'm working in. And so with that, many existing modules have been updated to work with core compatibility, and you can actually see when you look at modules, is it going to work or not? See here I'm in my PowerShell Core. If I look at my version, you can see I'm 6.11, my edition is Core. And if I did a get module,
and he is 6.1, but you know, this is
and I'm just going to look at what's available, not what I'm actually using. I've loaded. Nope, I can't spell. List is another A in that word.
Old. So I mean, it's not.
So if I go and look at this, it's going to show me all the modules known here, and it shows me the edition. So it's compatible with Core or Desktop or both. And right now, it's hiding a lot of them from me. The ones that it knows are not compatible, it's not going to show me. Now, I could make it show me by doing the skip edition check. And that will show me a lot more. Ones in the System32 folder, for example, they're all desktop edition. And once we get into the modules, around modules later on, we'll talk about some of those compatibility features that are available. But you can see all of these ones by default, it hid from me because they've not been updated to say, hey, look, these are compatible with Core. It's not had that flag set. Windows Server 2019, latest builds are actually updating even more of these to say, hey, yes, they're going to work. But the key point for now is we're going to see more and more of these modules, these bundles of commands are going to be enhanced to work with PowerShell Core. And it can coexist. It's a completely separate executable. It's pwsh.exe.
Okay, yeah.
Whereas that contrasts with just PowerShell for the regular Windows PowerShell capability. It has its own module folder as well. And I can always go and check. So here you can see I'm looking at those PS version tables. For Windows PowerShell, it's showing me the edition is desktop. For my PowerShell Core, it shows it as Core. So I'm going to recommend you go and get PowerShell Core. So there's the link. Go and download it. It's from GitHub. And there's got versions for all different platforms. See, here I am on that GitHub page. And if I scroll down, it is open source. So I can actually go and clone the entire repository.
At some point, I am going to have to do a deep dive into GitHub as well. So if that is something that interests you, you can expect that in the future.
And we're going to have a whole module on DevOps and infrastructure as code. But for right now, yes, I can download releases. But if I wanted to, I could actually help contribute to PowerShell Core. Hey, it's missing something. If I'm a developer, I can go and actually create that and then submit it. And then the maintainers of PowerShell Core might say, hey, great, I'm going to go and include that in a future build. But here we scroll down and I can see it's available for 64-bit Windows, 32-bit Windows, Ubuntu, Debian, CentOS, Mac OS, Fedora, etc. So I can go and download it, and then I can install that on my machine. And when you do that, what you're going to get is PowerShell 6. And what I've done is I've then pinned that to my taskbar so I can have easy access to PowerShell 6. So that's the first step. Go and download PowerShell Core so I have it on my box. And again, that is the pwsh.exe. If I look at my task manager, go look at the details, what I'll see is there's my PowerShell Core running. Very different from if I just run a regular PowerShell. I'll see that's housed in PowerShell.exe. So they're the different versions we have. So step one, go and get PowerShell Core. The next part is Visual Studio Code. This is free. You'll often hear it called VS Code. It's built, again, open source. This is not PowerShell focused. It's a great development environment for really anything, but it's extensible. There is actually a PowerShell extension that makes it really easy to create PowerShell scripts in VS Code, to debug in VS Code. And I need that because Windows has PowerShell integrated scripting environment, which is fantastic and works really well with Windows PowerShell, i.e. the version that ships in Windows, but it does nothing with PowerShell Core. And the reality is as well, just like Windows PowerShell is not really getting any more future investment, neither will PowerShell integrated scripting environment. Think of all the future direction is PowerShell Core. And when I think about, well, what is my dev environment for PowerShell, my testing environment, all that investment is VS Code with the PowerShell extension. So my next stop is to go and download Visual Studio Code. And again, because it's open source, it's available cross-platform. I've got Windows versions, Linux versions, and Mac OS. And once I install Visual Studio Code, I can actually go over here and I'll see my extensions. There's actually a PowerShell extension. I can just search for this and install it. But the first time you actually open up a PS1 file, it's going to say, hey, we notice you're leveraging PowerShell. We recommend you use this. It's going to give me snippets. So as I type, it's going to recommend, hey, you're probably creating a for each. You're creating an if. I have IntelliSense, so it'll auto help complete commands as I type them. I have this integrated console that I can actually run the lines of commands as I'm using it. So it's actually a really nice environment. Here I can just push F8 and it's going to go ahead and run that currently selected line. So this is going to replace the PowerShell integrated scripting environment that's built into Windows. And I love the integrated scripting environment. In my previous courses, you'd always see me in here. Even for regular PowerShell, I'd be running it from here, this Windows PowerShell ISE. It's great. I have all this great functionality I can use, but it does not support PowerShell Core.
Yeah, just up to 5.1.
And so for me, what we're going to focus on in this course is using PowerShell Core, realizing that all the commands we're going to do will also work in regular Windows PowerShell. But that means we need to use Visual Studio Code for our actual developer environment. And what's great about Visual Studio Code is it supports PowerShell Core and it supports Windows PowerShell and it supports command, and I can edit HTML and C#, etc., etc. In fact, I've actually got an extension I've installed. If we actually look again, called Shell Launcher. And what that does, if I push Control-Shift-T, well, hey, look, I can run PowerShell Core, I can run Windows PowerShell, I can open up a command prompt. So, and I can extend that through customization, but I can really easily get to kind of any shell I want to use, depending on what I'm currently testing. So Visual Studio Code, we want to go and download that.
Lucky for me.
Not absolutely required at this point, but Git, G-I-T, if we go and download this, this is the change management solution. This tracks different versions of code we have. It's a distributed solution. So I have a complete copy of the repository on my machine, and I can then synchronize that to a remote repository like GitHub or Azure DevOps repos. So these are the three core things I think about going and downloading. So if I jump over, go to Git, notice the same pattern, Windows, Linux, Mac OS. So everything I'm talking about here, and this is like really cool, everything we're going to do, I'm a Windows guy, so I'm going to be running all of this on Windows. But all three of the things I've mentioned, PowerShell Core, VS Code, and Git, are all available on Windows, Linux, and Mac. So I can do this across the platforms. And that's what's really amazing now around PowerShell Core and PowerShell is that I can use it across everything. I'm not now just focused on Windows, I'm going to be able to use it in all different places. Now, both VS Code and Git can actually auto-update. They can be configured to actually go and get new versions. Often with VS Code, you'll start it up and they'll say, hey, there's a new version. Do you want it? And you'll say, oh, sure, install. They'll say, okay, going to restart the VS Code instance now, and you're running the new version. PowerShell Core today does not auto-update. I could just go and download the new one when they release it, or I can use things like Chocolatey to go and check and update as needed. If you don't have Chocolatey installed, you can easily deploy it actually via PowerShell. Here I'm running an elevated PowerShell Core session. So elevated just means, hey, I'm searching for my PowerShell. I right click and I say run as administrator. And then I'm just pasting in this execution of a script. It's installing Chocolatey. I got some errors, but I think it still carried on. And once this completes, it says is now ready. So if I close that, it said to restart it. So actually, just type in my PowerShell, run as administrator again. At this point, this doesn't actually be in PowerShell. This is now just Chocolatey directly. If I was to now run Choco, very strange, I know. And if I run outdated, it will go and find any applications that I have that were outdated. And if in this case PowerShell Core was out of date, I could run Choco, upgrade, PowerShell Core. Again, I don't need that, but it would actually go and pull it down and give me the latest version. And because I'm actually running this inside, I'll have to restart this window post that installation completes. Now, I covered quite a lot of stuff pretty quickly. Don't worry too much about all of that yet. The key point here is that PowerShell now is really moving the PowerShell Core direction. It's not part of Windows. I need to go and install it like I would install anything else. And the development environment I want to use, I don't have to use VS Code at all. There are many other solutions, but that's really the Microsoft provided solution. It has that extension, and those extensions will auto update as well. So now, hey, you're starting off, you're looking at PowerShell, and you might already be thinking, well, which one should I be using? And so when I think about Windows PowerShell versus PowerShell Core, it really boils down to the fact that, well, Windows PowerShell will continue to ship. It's going to ship as part of Windows, but it's really unlikely it's going to get any new capabilities. PowerShell Core is the future for any new innovation in PowerShell.
I could be wrong.
PowerShell Core is available cross-platform along with VS Code, along with Git. So I'm really going to expect far more functionality and modules to support PowerShell Core in the future. So if it were me, and this is the change I've recently made, where possible, make PowerShell Core your primary environment. I'm going to develop in that using Visual Studio Code.
Okay.
Remember, I still have Windows PowerShell available to be used in a side-by-side manner if its use is required. However, remember, VS Code can also handle Windows PowerShell. And one of the other big shifts we're going to be seeing, and again, I'm going to have a module on this, is infrastructure as code. Even as administrators, we're now really having this continuous integration capabilities, these continuous deployments, where I'm going to be using services via change control, via pipelines. I'm going to use the Git client, and VS Code integrates directly in that. So that's going to become, I think, my primary tool that I'm going to leverage. And in fact, I'm really going to encourage that in this course, because you'll see me using VS Code. As we do the various pieces of code, I'm going to pull it in this sample.ps1 file. I'm actually going to make that available. That's going to be the assets for this course. And I'm going to actually do that via GitHub. So I've got this public repository that you can actually just go and clone. I get your version. So as I make changes, I add new examples. If you have a clone of this, you can always go and pull the latest version. That will have links to the downloads. That will have everything I'm doing in here. So if you have this clone on your local machine, all the sample code, well, it will just be in Visual Studio Code. I can very easily just go and update it with a single click of a button. And again, we're going to have a whole module on that in the future. So that's really where I think about as this is the direction I think most of us really want to go for the future. Think PowerShell Core. Now you've seen me do this already, but I can check the version of PowerShell I have. I can do a get host. That will give me information about my PowerShell. I can use PS version table, and then an actual attribute of PS version table is the PS version table PS version. So if I jump over, I can do get host. And you can see I'm a console host 6.11. I could look at my PS version table. And then you'll notice there's an attribute of that actually called PS version, which gives me the detail. I could even drill down even further if I wanted to and just get the major version. So that's an easy way I can actually go and check. Now, a quick word of warning. If I'm in Visual Studio Code, by default, I'm in this PowerShell integrated environment. And if I do get host here, well, I'm in the Visual Studio Code host, which is a completely different version. This is its own internal interface now. It's using PowerShell Core. And it's doing that because if I open up the command palette, these are all more advanced settings. Don't worry about this for now. But I changed it for my PowerShell executable path is pwsh.exe PowerShell 6. And I changed that in the shell windows as well. So it is using PowerShell Core, but its actual get host is going to be different. Now, if I actually fired off via an extension, I actually created a pwsh instance, then it will show me the correct information. Okay. And that command I just used, that's through kind of this shell launcher extension. And again, we're going to talk about these in more detail later on, but that's the shell launcher. And as part of that shell launcher, you can actually go ahead and add in the shells you want to make available. So I've got PowerShell Core. I've also got regular Windows PowerShell by calling PowerShell to X.
I just for a quick second, it's kind of high. Okay, there you can see. So there's two different instances of a shell here. So there's the PowerShell extension, which is what we're looking at here, that is using this Visual Studio Code host, whereas PWSH using get host uses the console host. So that is good to know.
Exe, and I've got the command prompt. So that's kind of some nice tweaks you can make to really customize Visual Studio Code to give me exactly what I want. But just a note there that if I just ran get host from Visual Studio Code by default in that PowerShell integrated window, it's going to give me the wrong information. just an FYI, and I imagine pretty much everyone is running a 64-bit version of PowerShell today. But Windows does ship with both 32 and 64-bit versions. If I'm a 32-bit OS, I'm only going to have the 32-bit version. If I'm a 64-bit OS, I have both. So if I was to jump over, run start, and type PowerShell, you'll see, yep, I have PowerShell x86 as well. Yep. I also have the x86 version of the PowerShell integrated scripting environment. And the reason we have that is if it was a 32-bit PowerShell module, then I need the 32-bit version of PowerShell. There are also some challenges connected to a 32-bit computer. If I'm using PowerShell Core, then I don't get both. I pick the version I want to install when I download it. So I just get that one version. If you wanted to really kind of check, remember a 32-bit operating system and integer pointer would be 4. It would be 8 for a 64-bit. So I could always just look at, well, if I have an integer pointer, what's the size? And it's 8, that means I'm 64-bit.
Who
there are other things I could do, but it's kind of an easy way.
How does he remember?
I can quickly check.
That's what I want to know.
So how do I get easy access to PowerShell? I'm going to make this leap. I want PowerShell everywhere. Well, if I right-click on the Start button, ordinarily it's going to show me Command Prompt and Command Prompt, an admin, i.e. an elevated version. I can change this to show me PowerShell through the taskbar properties. So if I jump over, if I right-click, you notice mine says PowerShell and PowerShell Admin. This was done through taskbar settings. And here I've got this replace command prompt with Windows PowerShell. If I turn that off, there's command prompt. I turn it on. I'm back to PowerShell. Now the challenge for me now though is this is Windows PowerShell, not PowerShell
Windows
Core.
X.
And so if that's the direction I want to go, that's not really helping me very much. So I can make those changes, absolutely. If I want to run as admin, it should say administrator at the top. So you notice this doesn't say administrator, this is just PowerShell 6. So if I ran PowerShell, if I right click on it instead of just clicking, I can say run as administrator. And now it says administrator : PowerShell. And that's what I need if I want to change kind of system properties, install software. So I want to have easy access. Now on the right click, I get both. That's why we have the PowerShell and the PowerShell admin option. But I can't just do that with PowerShell 6. So what I can do is I can pin it to the taskbar. So if you right click after you've launched it, you can just say pin to taskbar. I've already pinned it. If I unpin it quickly and then right click, I can say pin to taskbar and it will always be available for me. So now if it was closed, I can just right click super quick and say launch, or even run as administrator. If you do shift right click, you'd get all the different options, including run as administrator. But just by default, it's giving me that nice run as administrator with a right click, or I can run it in its normal mode.
I don't like to save things to
so that's my easy, quick way I can get to PowerShell. And once you've done this, you can customize the look. So in PowerShell 6, I could do properties.
To each their own.
I have various options around quick edit and the buffer history size. I can change my font, the sizes, the actual font I want to use. What's the layout? I have a very large height. It gives me this big scroll bar. My width of the buffer and the width of the window I want the same, otherwise I'll get a scroll bar along this way, which I don't want. I can change the colors. I could have it a little bit transparent if I wanted to. Sometimes that looks kind of cool with various things. And these same customizations I can do to regular PowerShell. So if I just go to PowerShell, I can do exactly the same. sets of customizations in the same way I could do it to command.exe. These are all kind of common customizations I can do. So I can do all those customizations, and pinning to the taskbar is probably going to be your friend for PowerShell Core. That's the best way to get that available. Now, if you are going to use Windows PowerShell, the integrated scripting environment really is the place to go. Regular PowerShell has basic autocomplete. If I jump over, if I just launch regular PowerShell, I can start typing and I can hit Tab and it will scroll through the possible options that I may want to use. It will do the same for the various parameters I might want to use as well. So that's just a standard. That's just there and I can leverage that.
Completion in PowerShell as much as I like
if I use the PowerShell integrated scripting environment, I get even more.
Based on my
So in the ISE, I can do the same thing, but now, if I actually give it a second, it's a bit too quick, notice it's actually giving me this nice IntelliSense. As I type, it's showing me all the different options and different parameters and attributes I can use. Same thing for all of those. So I get this great environment. If I'm in the interactive window, I get exactly the same thing. So it's really a very rich, nice environment to leverage. I have all this scripting capabilities. I have debugging. I have help. And so while I'm learning and even using PowerShell, the integrated scripting environment may absolutely be just a standard place. In fact, when I was focused on Windows PowerShell, I very rarely used the regular PowerShell window. I would kind of live in the integrated scripting environment. And if I wasn't actually using a script, I would just minimize the window and run things from here. There are a few things that behave differently. Certain confirmations, certain dialog boxes become a visual GUI instead of saying on the actual command line, which can be an issue. But for the most part, it would work the same way. And I could very easily jump around. I could type my code in the window and then execute however I needed to. So if I could do get process, for example, here, I could just push F8 to run that particular command. And I have those same commands in the Visual Studio Code as well. It does require the Windows presentation framework, which means it doesn't work on server core. And that's why ISE takes a little longer to start than just a regular PowerShell window. It has snippets. Snippets are great. So again, if I'm in ISE and I want to write maybe an if statement, so I start writing if, I'm really not sure what I want to do. Well, if I go to my, it's been a while, there we go, start snippets or Control J. So all these bits of code just available for me. Hey, look, there's an if else. And I can just now modify this, but it's putting the structure around automatically for me.
Handy. Even just
it only supports Windows PowerShell though.
Of the syntax.
So that can be the challenge for me right now. If I am looking to kind of embrace the future, then I can't really use the ISE. Technically, yes, I could write my scripts in ISD in a regular Windows and then move it over into PowerShell Core. But to be honest, Visual Studio Code has really caught up with the ISE. In some ways, it's even starting to overtake it. But the ISE is there. It's part of Windows. It's still a great environment if my focus is Windows PowerShell. And then we have Visual Studio Code. It's free. It's lightweight. It's cross-platform. It's really the place to go. This is the development environment that is the future. And again, not just for PowerShell. If I'm writing C#, Java, you kind of name it. This is actually, I think, based on the latest stats, the #1 developer environment out there. It has these extensions available, one of them being PowerShell, that gives me this phenomenal PowerShell experience. But there are many others as well. Supports for different types of terminals, so I can have PowerShell Core, I can have Windows PowerShell, I can have Command Prompt. It has native integration with Git for my change control. And as mentioned, I can do Windows PowerShell and
Well, you
PowerShell.
know what? Let's look that up real quick. Most used IDE. Yeah, Visual Studio, VS Code, and Android Studio. Cool. Glad we're working on it then.
Core. And in Visual Studio Code, I have the same snippet. They come along as part of the PowerShell extension. Before the PowerShell extension, I could manually add snippets.
And if you're currently wondering what the difference is between Visual Studio and VS Code or Visual Studio Code, I'm right there with you.
As part of a config, but I don't need to. So if I just start typing, well, look, I know I want to do if something. Hey, look, I can just hit tab and it's using a snippet. I can then put in my condition. Well, now I know I want to do an else. Okay, I'll hit tab again and it's filling out the else. So I have that same snippet capability in Visual Studio Code as well. Now, you may be super keen to get creating scripts in PowerShell, but I would start with the interactive shell. That's really the best way to start learning. And as mentioned, I can customize it just like the command prompt window. And I would start with just navigating around the file system. And as you'll see, dir works. So I'm going to jump over. Let's close VS Code for now. And I can do dir. Awesome. I can go and look around documents. And all of my standard commands seems to work here. I can do cd and dir. I wonder what's everything I've got in documents. dir/s. And it fails. Well, that's odd. And so, yes, dir works, but the switches don't. And it really boils down to intrinsic, i.e. built in, versus external commands.
Using ls.
Because the switches don't work for dir, but if I was to do something like ipconfig, the switches do work. Remember, dir is an intrinsic, a built-in command for CMD, yet somehow it's magically working in PowerShell. ipconfig is an external executable that I can call from CMD, and I can call it from PowerShell as well. So that's kind of the big difference here. And really what's happening here behind the scenes is there is no dir. What's happening behind the scenes is there's an alias. So, yep, I'm running dir, but it's an alias for getChildItem. Well, getChildItem.
Yeah, so from what I understand, let's see, we'll use our actual console host. Like he just used the get alias commandlet. We have does this work? No, that doesn't. Hmm. Either way, we see that there's, a fair amount, and I guess we can see that, yeah, so these here are only used in, or Sure, reload. Oh, you can't see, but I'm getting this. Extensions have been modified on disk. Please reload the window. Sure. Go back here. Okay. Not entirely sure how. We'll update that later.
That's the actual output. It has no such thing as /s. It has various different parameters I can pass, but one of them is not s. But you may have seen one of them that looks kind of the right thing, recurse. And that's going to go through all of the subfolders. And to prove a point, I can do dir recurse because I'm just calling getChildItem. And that's the key point. These things that seem to behave the same way, they're aliases to PowerShell commands. So to use non-PowerShell in PowerShell, it's going to behave differently depending on if it's that intrinsic command or if it's an external executable. As we mentioned before, you're not going to find a dir.exe or dir.com. It's part of command.exe. It's only working in PowerShell because of that alias. Therefore, any switches I want to use need to be valid for getChildItem. Now, when I'm working interactively, you'll see me run dir or ls is also an alias for getChildItem. You'll see me use cd. In your scripts you create, just thinking of the future, don't use aliases. You should use the full command name in your scripts. There's no need to use that shorthand there. It's more readable if I use the full command names. As mentioned, if I call an executable, well, the same things are going to work. And there are a huge number of aliases. It's really designed to make my life easy. If I do get alias, there's all these different things to help me.
Yeah, so like he was just
things like
showing,
GP for
ipconfig is not
get
up
item
here.
property, GPS, get process,
not an alias.
get PS sessions, GSV for get services, get content, get alias. All of these things, delete, diff, copy, when I'm working interactively, save me typing those things out. In my scripts, do the longhand way. So aliases are my friend, absolutely. At least initially. As we talked about, I have aliases for a lot of the common CMDs. There's aliases for them. But learn the proper PowerShell methods. Don't rely on these aliases long term. And as mentioned, in scripts, I want to use the full command. Yes, I can look at all the aliases. And one nice thing and a common alias you're going to use for a lot of commands when I do the output, so if I just do get process, I get this kind of table of the contents. What it's actually doing is all of the output is being sent to format as a table. But I could just as easily format it as a list. An alias for that is FL for format list. Likewise, there's an alias for format table of FT. So those are two kind of common, nice ones you're going to use a lot. So when I'm navigating, regular commands that we're used to using with a file system are actually going to work across different things. The registry, certificate stores, Active Directory, remote desktop services, IIS. I can navigate all of these just like a regular file system. Even Azure, in the Azure Cloud Shell, there's an Azure colon to go and navigate my subscriptions and resource groups and resources. And I can see all of the ones available with get PS drive. So if I jump over, if I do get PS drive, tab to complete, I can see, yep, I've got various drives, the
They use
A, the
these
C, the D, they're
providers.
familiar. I've got my alias, I can move to alias. I can look at my environment, I can look at functions, I can look at the registry, HKey current user and HKey local machine. So if I go cd env, env, and list, oh, there's all my environment variables. If I do cd HKey current user, well, now I'm in the registry. I can move around
Which is
just
pretty
like a
cool.
file system. I notice I use ls instead of dir. Once again, what is ls? Well, it's an alias to get child item. ls, dir, get child item, all the same thing. If this was an Active Directory hook-in, I could navigate AD like it was a file system. And again, with Azure, I can create a drive to Azure as well. I can add new drive mappings. So this is really powerful, and you'll use this later on as ways to do certain configurations that avoid me having to have any special commands for that product, because I'm just going to navigate it and set the objects in it just like it's any other file system object. It doesn't care. So go ahead and try that. Move around, leverage PowerShell, get familiar with the environment. Don't forget about your tab support. Super useful. I can use tabs for commandlet completion. I can cycle through parameters. I can cycle through valid values where the perimeter has a set of valid values. I can cycle through my files and folders. For example, if I do get-p, well, I can start cycling through all the different things that I could possibly use. If I actually narrow it down a little bit more and then do dash, I can see all the different parameters. For some of them that have a predefined set of possible values like error action, if I do tab, I can see the possible actions available to me. If I was doing get child item, I can tab and start seeing all of the folders, files that are actually in this folder. So tab, very much my friend here. PowerShell modules. Modules are loaded which contain the actual pieces of functionality I want to use, the commandlets, those commands I'm using. Now, prior to version 3 of PowerShell, I had to manually load in modules. If I wanted to do a piece of functionality, I could go and look at all the modules that I have currently loaded. I could see the ones that are currently available, that I have installed. I would then have to import the module manually, and then I could go ahead and see the commands in the module. In PowerShell v3 and above, I can just start using the command. It will find the first module in the module path that has a match and use that. Now that can be dangerous. I might not want that. So in my scripts, I might still implicitly import modules to make sure I'm using the actual commands I want, rather than some rogue module that's maybe earlier in the path of my PS module path that's not the one I want to use. So just be aware of that. And so if we jump over, if I look at the modules I currently have loaded, not very many, just the core things. If I do get module list available, it's going to only show me, remember, the ones that are core compatible, because I'm in PowerShell core. If you're in regular PowerShell, you'll only see the ones that are desktop compatible. And there's kind of a large number of them. And then if I do something like get ASVM, so that's using the compute PowerShell module of Azure. Notice that just word, it's showing me my VMs. And if I do a get module now, well, I can see it automatically loaded the AZ accounts and AZ compute module. It could have had me manually import them first. I could have absolutely gone import module az.start storage, and then I could use the storage ones, but I just don't need to. And I can go and look at, well, what commands are in the module compute. There's a whole lot of stuff there. And remember, I've got that verb noun. So the noun is the interesting part. So just show me all of the unique nouns. And I'm doing select. What I'm actually doing is select object, unique noun. And then I could send those objects to sort object noun. So just in order, it's showing me all the different nouns that are available in that module. And then I have different commands like get and new and remove, etc., etc. Like I say, I could have just as easily just done sort. I could have just done select. It's going to do the same thing. Note, the reason modules aren't just automatic load is they take a certain...
My only issue with that is, like, if you're trying to sort by noun, you'll have to double back and verify that, you know, this is for a get verb or a remove or new, you know, there's not one of these nouns for every single, you know, one of the verbs, so.
certain amount of resource. If I go and look, for example, at my task manager, and on modern systems, it's probably not the end of the world, but it would slow down the start of my window. But I've got my PowerShell with a certain amount of memory. If I was to actually go through and try and import all of them, so if I do a get module, list available, and then send those to import module, my guess would be one of these is going to start to go up pretty significantly, that one. So it's sucking up a whole bunch of memory, a whole bunch of CPU, as it's just loading in all these different modules. So notice how long it's taking. So think how long my window would take to initialize, and then look at the amount of resource I'm just sucking up on my system. And so we load in the modules we need. Again, they're not that bad, and modern systems are really not struggling that much. But now I'm using 160 megs of memory. That compares against 14 meg of a fairly clean system. Modules do get updated. I can always check the version of a particular module I have. We have the get module, the name. And I'm putting it in brackets so it outputs its object. And then I can look at the attribute of its version. So for example, if I import my module az.compute, and then I do get module az.compute.version, I can see the version of that module. And this does integrate with things like GitHub and various different repositories, Chocolatey. So I can say things like install module AZ if I wanted to install the Azure modules that I've been showcasing. In fact, in an elevated PowerShell window, remember, I start it by the right click, and I would say the run as administrator. I could run the command install module AZ. If there were updates, I could run update module AZ, and this isn't elevated, so there was an update, it's going to complain at me. But this would actually go and check, say, hey, is there a newer one available? And if there was, well, it would go and update it for me. So you can actually see, hey, look, it can't be updated right now because I'm not an administrator. So if I say run as administrator, and then we say update module AZ, it can actually go and connect check. And if there's updates, it will just go and pull those all down for me. And this goes across all of kind of PowerShell. I can get these new versions. There's a lot to PowerShell. You're going to want help. It has great help. I can do get help in a particular command. It will have full information, detailed information, examples. I can go and look online, show it in a window. And I can get the commands within a certain module. I can get commands related to a certain noun. So for example, well, I can do get help, get process. I could do get help, get process. Will show me some examples. And what it's actually telling me is I don't have the help installed. So what I need to do is if I do update help. Now again, I'm trying to run this just from a regular window. And in this case for the help, it's actually going to let me do that. And so once it's pulled down the help, I'll actually be able to get these examples. So I'm just running update help. So let's try that again. And now I actually get those examples. So great levels of information. If I didn't have that help, if I did the online, then we're just going to open up a web page where it's got all of the information available to me. If I'm curious about what I can do to something, well, give me all the commands that I can do related to the noun process. So I can get a process, debug a process, start, stop, and wait on a process. And as we just kind of saw, it's updatable. I can do update help. Normally it's run elevated to do that. This is PowerShell core, things are behaving a little bit differently. I can save it to a specific folder. When I do get help, ordinarily it will pull down the latest help that's available. I can look for it online. And I can even get the URI, that URL that I'm actually going to, so I can know exactly where it's going to send me. So that's the end of this module. The next module will be connecting commands together and mastering objects, unless I decide to put something in between at some point in the future. Now, we covered a lot of things today, a lot of code. All of the sample code I have in this GitHub repository. Go to John the Brit, PowerShell MC. And it's all in this sample.ps1 file. So here's all the various codes so far. So this is going to grow as I record more of these modules, as I update the videos in the future. There's kind of like a README file that I'm updating as well. So I've got the useful links that we kind of leveraged today, some of those commands that we used. And I'll tidy this up over time. So you want this content. You're new to this. Maybe you've just installed PowerShell Core. You've installed Git. It's like, well, I want to kind of get these files and get them updated. So at a bare minimum, as long as you installed the Git client from the links I had earlier, so you've got this Git commands. If just for right now, using nothing else, and I'm going to add these commands into the start of this as well in this README, so it'll be kind of the first things we have. If you just want to make this available to yourself, so it's on your local machine, all we have to do is create a new folder. So I can do new item. So we're going to use PowerShell. Item type is going to be a directory. And I'm just going to create it on the path, on the root of my machine. It doesn't matter where you put it. It does not matter. Git does not care. I'm going to create that new folder. I'm now going to move to it. And on this web page, there's a clone or download, and there's a URL. Click this little copy. And now we're just going to run get clone, paste that URL, and hit a dot, i.e. current location. And it's going to pull all of this down to your machine. If you want the latest version, make sure you're in this folder and just type get pull. that will get you the latest version. And now if you go and look, you have my sample file and you have the README with the links in it. And so if ever I update this, just go into this folder. You have to be in this folder because remember, if I go and look, so I actually want here, I want to look at the hidden files. So that's the PowerShell 3 added this nice little hidden option. So that's my get subfolder. If I was to actually go and look at this on my C drive, there's my files. This is the change control. That is my local. It's a distributed versioning system. So I have a complete copy now on my machine. I have to be in this folder to run those commands because that's what it's going to interact with to know where is the origin, i.e. my GitHub location. So now you have that locally on your machine. Update this. If I add new modules, if I tweak things, very easy, just run get pull and you're ready to go. I really hope you found this useful. Again, keep an eye out. I'm going to have more modules being added. This is the introductory. It's a bit longer than the others will be because we kind of talked a lot about PowerShell core and setting a few things up. And I look forward to seeing you on the next PowerShell mod. Hope you my order. I have a complete copy now on my machine. A sample file.
All right. Let me make sure that this URL still even works. Well, all right. Apparently it does. Looks like he hasn't really touched it much since posting, but so then what we can do, like he was saying, um, we can do cd to desktop. I know we have sure we can just do a make directory and we'll do JSavill. Yes, JSavill. PowerShell Masterclass. And then we will do that git clone. So from what I'm understanding, here we are currently in this folder that I want to place the, or that I want to copy his GitHub entire PowerShell repository. So I'm calling git to clone from the URL that he has it placed at, and then this dot here at the end is just going to place it directly where I'm at. It's just a syntax that I've gotten used to, and yeah, So like this right here, when we're changing directory, it's showing here and then the subdirectory. I don't know why Windows, you know, PowerShell does it like this. I'm, once again, more familiar with Bash and more of a fan. Uh, hmm. Well, I know that I installed it, so let's copy that. We'll uh, run as admin and is not an empty directory. So what do we have in here, huh? Uh, well, that's funny. Okay, so I didn't have to use the dot. So we can refresh this. Oh, oh no. I didn't want to place that in System 32. Oh, I've made a mistake. Oh boy, that's okay. No worries. Okay. Hmm. All right. So we're gonna everything else is contained in there. We're gonna cut that one right on out of there and move you right here. Well, the good news is I think that's exactly what we need in here, and nothing to do with. All right, well, day one, had ourselves a fun little lesson learned. When you run as administrator, make sure that you are in the correct directory because that will uh, open in a different location. Uh, Total brain fart. I should have remembered that, but anyways, we have everything we're supposed to get, and it's a good first start. Thank you, John Savill. Like I said, you have been a source that I have come to before. It says in your videos not to use any of this in a or any of this presentation without explicit permission, but you have no way for me to contact you. So this is me contacting you. But for real, I hope you don't have any issues. Uh, if you do, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But thank you, John Savill. Thank you for watching, and I think that'll be it for now. Next video will be about connecting commands. So piping output from one command as input for another, and we will be getting into some fun things. So I hope to see you there. Um, yeah. Hey, hi, and howdy world. It's me, Blixio, and I will see you next time.